The Biden administration is working to create leverage for Kyiv on the battlefield before Trump takes office. Alongside the dangerous escalation of the assassination of General Kirillov, last night, Ukraine continued its missile strikes targeting the Rostov region. Russia reported that the area was hit by 10 missiles, including US-made ATACMS, with the target being the city of Kamensk-Shakhtinsky. Moreover, on December 16, Bloomberg reported that several northern European countries, including Germany, the UK, Poland, the Netherlands, Denmark, Estonia, Norway, Finland, Sweden, and the 3 Baltic countries, announced that they would require all tankers to provide insurance information. Based on Bloomberg's information, these European countries have not yet decided to use force to detain Russian ships that refuse to provide insurance. However, they said there might be more tangible measures. It should be noted that Denmark will play a key role in this, as Russian oil tankers often pass through the narrow strait in the Baltic Sea. Danish military intelligence indicated that the Russian fleet, in response to Western inspection efforts, might begin escorting oil tankers through the Danish Strait, which would increase tensions between Russia and NATO countries, possibly even leading to minor confrontations in both the Baltic and Arctic seas. In comparison, the Western long-range missile attacks on Russia, which have had little impact on the battlefield balance, pale in comparison to the effect of the West preventing Russian energy exports. This could become a genuinely red line for the Kremlin. Now, let's move on to the situation in the Middle East. In Syria, Israel has been intensively destroying the Syrian army's weapon and missile storage sites, with an unprecedented scale of airstrikes. A total of about 600 airstrikes took place in the past 8 days, aiming to prevent them from falling into the hands of the HTS rebels. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reported that Turkey is concentrating its military forces on the Syrian border, in preparation for a more extensive invasion. Notably, this attack was carried out by the Syrian National Army SNA, which is the Kurdish group backed by Turkey, fighting against the Syrian Democratic Forces SDF, the Kurdish group supported by the US. As mentioned in previous videos, the deep state continues to complicate Trump's situation by pushing to NATO members, the US and Turkey, into confrontation. Currently, the Kurdish group supported by the US has called on Donald Trump to stop Turkey's invasion of Syria. Kurdish official Ilham Ahmed has sent a letter to Trump stating that Turkey's goal is to establish de facto control over our land before you take office, forcing you to engage with them as rulers of our territory. We believe you hold power to prevent this catastrophe. President Erdogan has listened to you before, and we trust he will heed your call again, Ms. Ahmed wrote to Mr. Trump. Your decisive leadership can stop this invasion and preserve the dignity and safety of those who have stood as steadfast allies in the fight for peace and security. Meanwhile, the New York Post recently revealed that George Soros' far-left Open Society Foundations funded over $50 million to a network of groups sympathetic to Iran, with members of these groups holding senior positions in the Biden-Harris administration. Notably, it is the extremist faction within the Biden-Harris administration that is plunging the Middle East into flames. On the other hand, Donald Trump is expected to reinstate maximum pressure sanctions on Iran. Last week, Taiwanese intelligence reported that China conducted large-scale military drills in the Asia-Pacific area surrounding the island of Taiwan. The deployment of an astonishing number of warships on an enormous scale targeted Taiwan and extended geographically to the waters beyond the first island chain. This strategically significant island chain includes Japan, Taiwan, parts of the Philippines, and Indonesia. The Financial Times reported that Taiwan officials are struggling to respond to the unprecedented scale of military drills, which have taken them by surprise, calling it China's largest naval deployment in nearly 30 years. Notably, the Biden administration has remained silent on China's provocative actions. The Financial Times assesses that Washington has downplayed the severity of the issue, treating it as being on par with other large-scale military drills. They also do not view this exercise as a response to the visit of Taiwan's president to Hawaii and Guam. Another far-left government collapses. The government of Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau is facing a political storm and economic turmoil after Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's sudden resignation, amid growing concerns about Trump's return to power. It can be said that Canada is the fourth largest power in NATO, after the US, Germany, and France. Germany and France saw their governments collapse within a month due to rising budget deficits and economic stagnation. Additionally, all four of these governments share a common trait. They pursue globalism and use taxpayer money to fund military aid for Ukraine fervently. Just like Chancellor Scholz and President Macron, Trudeau's approval rating is at a historic low due to inflation, rising living costs, and the growing public perception of the incompetence of the left-wing Liberal Party. Canada's political crisis has reached its worst point with Freeland's resignation, the increasing trust in the opposition, pressure from US tariffs, and the pressure to increase NATO defense spending. In particular, Freeland's resignation signals the growing chaos within the Trudeau Liberal government. Her departure is significant because she was a key figure in Trudeau's cabinet and Canada's chief negotiator in the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement USMCA. The left had viewed her as an essential counterbalance to Trump's tariff threats. In her resignation letter, Freeland alluded to Trump's threat of imposing tariffs as follows: "Our country today faces a grave challenge. The incoming administration in the United States is pursuing a policy of aggressive economic nationalism, including a threat of 25% tariffs. We need to take that threat extremely seriously. That means keeping our fiscal powder dry today, so we have the reserves we may need for a coming tariff war. That means us chewing costly political gimmicks, which we can ill afford, and which make Canadians doubt that we recognize the gravity of the moment." Finance Minister Freeland, a strong supporter of the liberal globalist ideology, fiercely criticized Trump's conservative stance. She refused to attend a recent meeting between Trudeau and Trump at Mar-a-Lago. On the other hand, Trump criticized Freeland's resignation letter, calling her behavior toxic and completely counterproductive to making agreements that would benefit the increasingly frustrated Canadian citizens. Many speculate that Freeland's departure reflects her inability to carry the burden of a government losing credibility and internal divisions within the Liberal Party. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party, led by Pierre Poilievre, is gaining popularity among Canadians and has a growing chance of leading the country. It can be said that Donald Trump's 2024 campaign speech marks the death knell for the liberal globalist ideology, signaling the return of economic nationalism that Trump implemented during his first term. Trump has repeatedly stated that tariffs are his favorite word and the most beautiful word in the dictionary. His promises to expand tariffs and bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. were decisive factors in his election victory. Canada's trade surplus, particularly in energy, agriculture, and vital minerals, made the country a target for Trump's punitive measures. Note that Trump had reimposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum in 2020, citing the need to protect U.S. national security. This remains utterly valid today. Trump's return to power indicates that Canada, Mexico, and China will find themselves back under the U.S.'s scrutiny. However, unlike Trump's first term in 2017, Canada is now in an unprecedentedly weak position. The collapse of the government, or a prolonged political crisis, combined with a struggling economy, will make it difficult for Canada to respond effectively to the U.S. Even if a provisional government is quickly established, it will not have enough strength to negotiate with Trump. Trump's return to power will also pressure Canada to increase its defense spending further. Throughout his first term, Trump repeatedly criticized NATO allies for overly relying on the U.S. security umbrella, emphasizing that they must spend 2% of GDP on defense. Canada is often singled out as one of the worst offenders. Despite the Trudeau administration's support for NATO expansion, Canada's defense spending is far from meeting this 2% target. If Trudeau's government collapses, Canada risks entering a period of paralysis, and Trump could unilaterally impose policies on trade, border security, and defense. Trump did not wait until his inauguration to announce tariffs against China, Mexico, and Canada. He threatened to impose a 25% tariff on ALL imports into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico. As for China, Trump threatened to increase tariffs by an additional 10%, on top of the previous 60%, which would undoubtedly bring Beijing to its knees. Mainstream U.S. media have continuously criticized Trump's tariff policies, arguing that they would harm the U.S. itself by raising living costs, slowing economic growth, and that a trade war would damage the global economy. However, two American commentators on CNN argued that Trump wants to use tariffs as a negotiating tool and leverage to achieve reasonable outcomes, not as a punishment. It will generate revenue for the U.S. budget, offsetting the huge deficit. Positively, it will significantly improve trade terms with key U.S. trade partners and rebuild the manufacturing base in the U.S., which has been severely eroded. Of course, supporters of globalist liberalism, such as Canada's finance minister, view Trump's tariffs as an example of new protectionism or economic nationalism, opposing the global free trade policy. However, the father of economic theory, Adam Smith, was a true economic nationalist. In 1776, Smith hypothesized that free trade between all nations would be ideal but difficult to achieve, as very few countries would fully comply with such a system. He also warned that unrestricted trade with countries lacking necessary standards could be dangerous, benefiting one nation while harming another. Oyen cited China as an example. China enjoys the position of a developing economy in the World Trade Organization, which is supposed to be a level playing field for nations. However, China has broken every rule and violated every commitment, including the promise to respect Hong Kong's standard law system, the promise to limit fentanyl exports to Mexico, the promise to allow third-party audits of Chinese companies listed on U.S. stock exchanges, the promise to reduce tariffs, eliminate non-tariff barriers, and protect intellectual property in exchange for WTO membership, debt trap diplomacy in its Belt and Road Initiative in Africa and other regions. In reality, China is a nation that manipulates its currency and uses espionage and other methods to manipulate global public opinion. In The Wealth of Nations, the foundational economic text, Adam Smith argued that if tariffs and trade barriers were abolished, cheap foreign goods would quickly replace domestic products on the market, depriving thousands of people of their jobs and means of self-sustenance. Indeed, the flood of Chinese goods into the U.S., under a one-way trade policy, not free trade, has severely harmed the U.S. economy. Many Americans, especially those working in manufacturing, have lost their jobs and fallen into poverty and despair. This impact is not only felt in the Rust Belt but also threatens the health of the American people, as many U.S. pharmaceuticals are now produced in China. The challenges the U.S. faces are not unique to the U.S. but affect many countries worldwide, including Vietnam, Cambodia, Russia and China's cheap goods stifle domestic industries and impact public health due to toxic chemicals in substandard products. Through this specific economic example, we can understand why Trump views China as America's #1 adversary, and why his economic nationalism policies are not as authoritarian and aggressive as the globalist narrative suggests. We will conclude our commentary here, thanking you for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in the following our show.